Trustee Calandrello.
Here.
Trustee Healy.
Here.
Trustee Katsinas. Trustee Malani.
Here.
Mayor Pico.
Here.
Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Approval of July 6, 2020 Committee of the Whole meeting minutes.
I'll entertain a motion to move to approve the minutes of the regular meeting of the Committee of the Whole of July 6, 2020.
So moved. Second.
Call the roll.
Trustee Fenn.
Aye.
Trustee Katsinas.
Aye.
Trustee Dodge.
Aye.
Trustee Calandrello.
Aye.
Trustee Healy.
Aye.
Trustee Malani.
Aye.
Mayor Pico.
Aye.
Sertoma Center Development Agreement.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Katsinas.
I move to recommend to the Village Board of Trustees approval of the development agreement for the Sertoma Center located at 14205 Union Avenue. Second.
Are there any questions or comments? Call the roll.
Trustee Katsinas.
Aye.
Trustee Fenton.
Aye.
Trustee Dodge.
Aye.
Trustee Calandrello.
Aye.
Trustee Healy.
Aye.
Trustee Malani.
Aye.
Mayor Pico.
Aye.
Code amendments.
So this item is for discussion only. I believe Trustee Dodge had asked for some information on A-frames, so I guess if staff could.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, this item was originally brought up by Trustee Dodge to go over what our requirements were for A-frame signage. As long as we were having the discussion about some of our sign regulations that we were reviewing, I added information about temporary signage banners, as well as we've received recently some inquiries about increasing the size and height of flags and flagpoles on commercial properties. I can go through each of those if you like, or if you have specific questions from the report, whichever is
Let's just give the quick summary of of each one.
Sure. So currently, in 2018, as you're aware, the village has went through a large-scale revamp and rewrite of our signage code, and that was in relation to a landmark case that basically talked about how signage could be regulated in municipalities, and just about every sign code throughout the country had to be amended in some way, shape, or form. And basically, the gist of it, or what you need to know, is we're allowed to restrict time, place, and manner in with which a sign is presented, and not the contents of that sign. For A-frames, previously, the village did not allow them. They were prohibited. The reason being, at least it was communicated to me at the time, is that because we don't have a traditional downtown setting where A-frame signs are typically used, putting an A-frame sign in front of your storefront on LaGrange Road is a little bit different and has different implications. So potentially, if it's not secured property, it could end up in the drive aisle, in the parking lot. It causes more of a safety concern. As a result, we never allowed them. After the review of the sign code in 2018, it was the decision that we would allow them. We would require specific stipulations, but they would not be a permitted, like we would not issue a specific permit. If businesses were to inquire, they would have to follow those specific regulations, so it would give us an opportunity to enforce it if need be, but there wasn't a permit that was required. Some of the things that were, that the stipulations were, we wanted a more permanent material. As opposed to plastic, it would have to be aluminum or wood. It would have to be affixed to the ground, but it also would have to be brought in every night, so there wouldn't be any concerns of it being worn or potentially, flying off the property or being blown away. And then there was a size limitations as well. As we instituted this code, because these aren't the typical A-frame signs that you would see, and when I say typical, I mean typically they're plastic. You'd see that's what everyone usually has. They adjust what the message is on there, and because of that, we rarely saw compliance with this code section. and the difficulty with which to enforce it led us to basically bring it, in addition to Trustee Dodge commentary, we brought it to the committee to see direction. Is this something that we need to be regulating, or we want to outright prohibit because it's been difficult to enforce?
Have we had any major issues? I mean, I've been around different stores. I really haven't seen any major issues with it.
There isn't really, I wouldn't say there's major issues. What I would say is that we rarely see an instance where they comply with all of these stipulations, is what I would say. And it's not necessarily complaint driven, but it's essentially a code section that is not being adhered to, and it's somewhat difficult to, with the limited amount of, staff that we have to enforce these things, we have to prioritize some of those responsibilities.
But back to the question of, have we received complaints about it?
No, not particularly.
Okay.
Mayor
The
Peacock?
time when we, excuse me, sorry, just one instances that we have is when we explain our regulations as to what they can or can't have. Typically, this is a more expensive sign, not that potentially has to be custom made. It's not sort of one that they order right off the shelf. So that was a complaint that I did receive.
So complaint on businesses ends about that we require it, but no complaints from residents as far as that people have them.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, Trustee Dodge?
Yeah, this came up in, I think, a conversation with Ed or staff or legal. I was in another town that allowed A-frames, and with all the challenges you have with A-frames, and they also allowed gaming. And my understanding is if you allow this type of sign, you cannot regulate what is advertised, which is probably appropriate given, things like the First Amendment. My concern with this, when I discovered that was an issue, was always the idea of more than a few businesses having out in front of their business a sign that says gaming or slots here. So it's specific to that type of use. And if I understand it correctly, it's all or nothing. You either allow A-frames or you don't, because we can't regulate the content.
That's correct.
And so my concern is simply, I'd rather not have the A-frames at all if there's a chance that exactly what a number of us didn't want, which is to make it visible about gaming outside of business, is possible.
Okay. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Katsinas?
I just had a question about real estate signs. Often you see open house signs on parkways. Technically, under the village code, is that not allowed?
If it's in the public right of way, yes, that's not allowed. That's correct.
So it has to be
There
on
are
private property?
Yeah, there are specific regulations in regards to real estate signs. It's, again, one of those items where there are requirements that need to be followed, but a real estate agent doesn't need to apply for a permit every time they have a listing.
Okay.
So if there is a complaint, we have a way to enforce that, but like I said, if every house that you have a listing on, you don't have to go and get a permit for those
I'm just
signs.
thinking about it on a Sunday afternoon.
Are there any questions or comments about the A-frame signs?
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Malani?
just kind of curious, why no plastic signs? Because usually the plastic signs could be filled with sand, water, anything
So-
like that to make them heavy so they don't blow over?
The plastic was more of an aesthetic item that was added to the code. There was a visual preference survey that was circulated to the board when the code was amended, and they selected the non-plastic version.
Okay. And then with like anchoring, they recommend their anchoring. So if we lag bolt them to the ground or something like that, there has to be some kind of physical way to anchor it to the ground. Is this something that's temporary and they have to take it down every time they bring the sign in?
The way the code reads, yeah, that they bring it inside they have to maintain the adequate, passing distance for pedestrian walkways of always, but they do have to bring it in at night.
Yeah. So like no issues of somebody like leaving their anchor on the ground and tripping over it when they didn't have their sign out, nothing like that?
Not that we haven't received that, but that's something that, could potentially happen.
So they must be doing it right. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Fenton?
I would be inclined to agree with Trustee Dodge, because one of the things when we did allow gaming, we basically said we didn't want any outside advertisement. And that's something that I'm concerned about if we continue to allow the A-frames. I mean, currently, I don't know of any, but also our gaming, even though tonight we're decreasing, but, if it starts increasing, are there going to be people who are going to start doing that? So I guess And since the business owners are complaining that they're a pain in the butt anyway, because of our rules and regulations, I guess maybe we should just eliminate A-frames and we don't have to worry about it.
Any other comments? I guess my take on the A-frames are, at the current time, we've had them for, what, almost 2 years now, and we really haven't had any complaints about them. I haven't seen any issues. I don't know of anyone that has had any specific issues with them. So, you know, I know some businesses use them in their small businesses and some of these small retail centers, and I have never seen, you know, I've never noticed them as a problem. So I guess my inclination right now, and this is discussion item only, I mean, someone's free to try and move it forward, but I don't see that it's a big issue at the present time, since we get plenty of complaints about a lot of stuff, and this is not one of them. And I don't see any reason to create an issue that, you know, when we're not having one.
Mayor Pico?
Trustee Dodge,
Don't know if we need a formal motion or if we just want to do.
this was a discussion item only.
Yeah, no, that's you know, just as a quick consensus of the board, which is I prefer to get rid of them to prevent the issue in the future, because I think there's plenty of towns where the initial folks who applied for gaming licenses were the small businesses, the local shops. Inevitably, that will change over time, and so I prefer to we went out of our way to adjust the sign ordinance so that we didn't have a lot of signage related to gaming, even though we allowed it. I think that was broadly what we tried to get to as a compromise. So my preference would be get rid of the A-frames.
All in favor of getting rid of the A-frames,
Aye.
signify by saying aye. Trustee Dodge?
Oh, sorry, aye.
Okay, all in favor of keeping the A-frames, signify by saying nay. Nay.
Hey,
Calendar, you no?
I was a no.
So we'll just leave the A-frames for now?
Okay.
5-2.
Thank you.
All right.
And then the other stuff that was on here as well was the flagpoles.
There's temporary signage first and then flagpoles. So temporary signs, as part of that same sign code amendment, what we did is restricted temporary banners to specific situations. So a grand opening, a store closing, and what it basically was something out at a special event. If a business was having a special event, they were allowed to have a banner. The issue that this created in enforcement is, in the past, we allowed a certain amount of signs per year per business, limited the location and the size of the sign, and then issued the permits accordingly. And basically, as long as you applied for them and you still had, you know, a permit yet to get, you were awarded it, or you were allowed to have it. The issue that we're having now is the distinction between what's a normal everyday operation and what's a special event. Is a $4 haircut a special event, or is that just a normal sale that the business is having? So instead of having staff spend time on deciding whether an event is special or not, it'd probably be better just to go back to a specific amount of banners per year. We can add this to our code amendments to discuss the most appropriate location, the appropriate size, and then it's across the board that the regulation seems a little bit more consistent. It is going back to something that we had in the past, but that's why I'm bringing it to the committee now to see if that's something that we want to investigate, or if we're okay with the way it's sort of been operating, you know, currently.
Since you put this on here, I'm assuming, what's your recommendation?
My recommendation is to go back to a consistent, several times a year, limited to, you know, the size that we had previously, and then also the location. Just simplifies the permit process so they can get it over the counter. There isn't any review or analysis really.
Any questions or comments on that?
Just a point of clarification.
Okay.
So, Ed,
Yes.
we went out of our way to get rid of waving flags and inflatable pretzel people advertising mattresses. Still forbidden?
Yes. This would be just for banners is what I'm referring to. So I think
Just
previously it was 40 square feet, limited to twice a year, something along those lines. And then once you're done, you're done. You get your two, and you're done.
Just making sure. Thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilor.
has, since the new code, have we have a lot of businesses doing more than twice a year? Do you think people using this more often? I mean, do you think we need to maybe increase per year?
I think that's the discussion that we'll have when we bring the code update. We can take a look at some of that data and some of the people that have been issuing these, what has been the biggest issue. But the problem that we were finding ourselves in is you know, someone that could have gotten a banner previously now is calling it a special event just to meet that section of the code, and that wasn't ever the intent, I don't believe, so.
So what you're suggesting is that you dive into this deeper, bring us back more data, and we have a deeper discussion on it.
You'll see it on a bigger item with more amendments, but this will be included in it to say, you know, we're going to move forward this or not.
Is there anyone opposed to them doing that dive? No. No? Okay.
That'd be
Then
good.
Go ahead and do that. All right, and then Flagpole?
Flagpoles. So recently, like I stated earlier, we've seen a request for taller flagpoles and for larger flags. The current restrictions are 18 feet, 25 square feet for the area. This is applicable to commercial and residential districts, and in recent, I guess, for example, there have been instances where the village has granted variances. The BMW at 159th and Wolf Road has a variance for a 50-foot tall flagpole, and we've recently received requests for a petitioning development that the board will later see that is looking as kind of their, you know, they use it as their marketing and their advertising. They typically have a very large flag. My recommendation or my direction that I'm seeking from the committee and the board here is for staff basically to look at increasing that. You know, we're thinking about potentially having a maximum height of 30 feet. I included some examples from other communities. Obviously, we'll do more research to that. And then something that matches that in terms of the area. So it isn't anything specific at this point, but if it's not something that the board wants to move forward on, I'd rather have staff understand that now, and we'll communicate that to our development community, so.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Fenton?
why in the world would you double it,
What's that?
the flagpole? You said you want to go to 30 feet. It's 15, correct?
18.
18? Okay, almost, just short, 3 feet
So,
short.
based on what I saw from the commentary from the people that are requesting it, they're saying 18 feet isn't even a standard size that they could order in a commercial capacity. I understand that might not be exactly the case, but also in the regulations that we found from other communities, 30 feet seem to be more in line than with what we have. So honestly, other than just looking at that as being a benchmark to evaluate later on when we look at it, that's where the 30 feet came from.
We've also issued a variance above that, correct?
Correct.
So,
Right, it was at a car dealership.
is there anybody opposed to looking into that into more depth and bringing us back that information? Okay,
All right, thank you.
you're welcome. I think you need to stay there.
I do. It's all me tonight.
Private pond maintenance?
Yes.
So I'll turn it over to you again for the private pond maintenance.
Okay, so this item has been something that's been in discussions recently with developments, and I'll just give a brief synopsis, and then you guys can ask, you know, some of the questions. The current process for residential developments, the village approves the design and construction of a detention pond associated with a residential development. Along with that, there is a 3-year maintenance and monitoring plan that's required for any developer to submit to the village that states how they're going to plan it, how they're going to maintain the plantings, and how it's going to function. As part of their letter of credit release or bond release that the village does, they do an annual inspection of the pond and its facilities and basically give a report. If, let's say, in a perfect world, they pass all 3 in 3 consecutive years, the intent is to reduce the amount of letter of credit associated with the pond by 1/3 each year until ultimately the money is returned to the developer or released, and then the pond ownership is retained by the village. In recent history, what we've seen happen is a couple different things. The cost to maintain some of these ponds that were previously either held or deferred maintenance, whether it be private or publicly owned, has been significant. And for us to maintain that, it doesn't seem feasible. So we started to look at opportunities where the ponds would be privately maintained by a homeowners association. Again, in the past, we've gone down this path. A lot of times that seems like that will address the issue. occasionally the homeowners association is not equipped with the knowledge or the resources to maintain these ponds appropriately, in which case they become the village problem again, and again, the costs are exorbitant. So what I'm seeking direction on is sort of an amendment to that policy where and just for the sake of the discussion, in commercial and multifamily developments, the village does not retain ownership. They are maintained privately, either by the developer or an owners association of some sort that's structured. But specifically in regards to single-family residential, our preliminary research has shown it's only a handful of communities, but very rarely do those villages or towns surrounding us have a process where they will take over new detention ponds. The detention ponds typically that the village owns or a park district owns are the problem ponds, or ones that were developed many years ago before there was the possibility for an association or something along those lines. What we're trying to do now is any single-family development moving forward would be required to have their detention facility maintained privately, and it would have to be set up through a homeowners association. And if, for whatever reason, the homeowners association were to disband or could not handle the maintenance, then the village would set up a fallback dormant special service area, in which case, if we needed to do the work, the village could do the work and then make that special service area active, which would impose a specific tax on the defined subdivision area that would make the village whole over a defined period of time for the work that was done. So there's a change in policy to make all single-family home ponds private. There's a change in policy to require the fallback SSA in those instances. And then also the other requirement that's mentioned in this report is, in addition to the 3-year maintenance and monitoring plan, the village would require a long-term maintenance plan. And that long-term maintenance plan would be a discussion amongst the developer, the potential HOA, and essentially a qualified contractor, right? There's 2 things that we'd like to get out of this. We want to make sure that the HOA is equipped to handle the level of maintenance and do it appropriately so that the pond functions correctly. And then also, as the maintenance of these ponds, it could fluctuate year by year. So we don't want any particular, to the best that we can assist, any particular subdivision or association to see a spike in that assessment associated with pond maintenance that, they may not have anticipated when they were, coming to purchase the home. So that discussion can involve a lot of different things. Recommended maintenance by the village, the plan will have to be approved by the village, and then ultimately we can also go down the path of potentially having pre-approved contractors that have the ability to do the maintenance and the repairs that we're looking for. So it's a little wavering from what we've done in the past, but it seems to be more consistent with our neighbors, and hopefully will lead to some cost savings.
And we're talking about doing this with new subdivisions, obviously not the ones we currently maintain.
Correct. This won't be retroactive. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on this?
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Healy?
Ed, what made those costs go up?
Well, I don't know.
Is it additional licensing by the state, or is it
The costs go up probably because of the deferment of the maintenance. If, the idea behind a naturalized planted pond is that it has little to no maintenance if it's designed, installed, and maintained correctly. Unfortunately, in some instances, because of the way naturalized plantings look, a lot of times homeowner associations may not understand that that's functioning properly, and it gets cut, right? So the first time out, it gets cut. So right there, you're already in, you're in a significant hole and you don't even realize it. Then, because it's not built as it was designed, it doesn't function properly, and all those problems just compound. But to, someone that doesn't understand that or doesn't realize that that's happening, it looks like a pond and it's functioning. The problem, one problem shows itself, and then you realize that the cost of that, and it's significant, so.
So as an example, and I've gotten just a few of these emails over the last couple of years. Sure, Ed's seen them as well. Just demanding that, we don't maintain the ponds and they look horrible and blah, 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 because there's weeds. Well, actually, they're native plantings. And then they show me a picture of how it's supposed to look, which is rock and nothing else and mowed all the way up to the edge of the pond. That's not how it's supposed to look, because then all the runoff goes there, all of the chemicals go there, you end up with a bunch of algae later, and you end up with an unhealthy pond in the long run. They should look much more like this that you see behind us, and people don't understand that, and a lot of HOAs don't know how to maintain that either. So, and it does get more expensive. But yeah, if you know how to maintain it and you keep it, then it shouldn't require as much work by doing a little bit each year.
Hopefully.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Fenton.
So how would the village go about making sure that the developer lets the individuals who are purchasing their homes know that this policy is in effect?
So this would all be included in a development agreement, and there would be documents in regards to the specific special service area, that all of that information would be recorded against the property. So anybody that would look to purchase this at any point in the future, that information would be available to them.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Malani.
So just kind of curious, I know we've approved a bunch of pond maintenance here in the past year or so, but what's about the average cost to maintain a pond per year?
That is a great question. Very high. I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I mean, you could talk in the hundreds of thousands of dollars very easily.
Okay.
For, because you got to think of, there's the hard cost of actually fixing the pond, but there's a soft cost of understanding from an engineer what is wrong with it and how do you fix it. Sure. So that design can get you in the hundreds of thousands of dollars very, very quickly.
And then I just want to make sure I understand this right then. So whether or not they decide to have a homeowners association, we would put an SSA in place?
We would make the requirement that there's a homeowners
That'd be a
association.
okay.
When the land is under single ownership from the developer, it's typically very little disagreement that they set up a homeowner association or even the SSA, because they're in control of the property. The other stuff we just have to be aware of is that we notify the residents so they're aware, as Trustee Fenton mentioned.
Okay, thank you.
And the idea of being here, I think, and I'll make an analogy, we're dealing with a creek. We're having these issues. These issues were foreseeable in some way, probably, and it's all on private property, right? And it's eroding because there's a creek, and there's a project to spend millions of dollars that's been approved to go fix it, but the homeowners won't let us on the property, right? So this precludes that from happening. So we could, if a homeowners association lets a pond go, we can't go in there and repair it and fix it. Hopefully, because of the regular inspecting it and looking at it, we'd be able to get on top of it before that happens and not cost the HOA a ton of money. That'd be the goal, right?
That's the idea, is to help them forecast what potential costs would be when we have this initial discussion, but that is the goal, so that doesn't spike in the future.
Mayor Peacock?
Trustee Dodge.
Ed, where do the specs for the ponds come from?
The specs for the pond, so that would be determined by the engineering review for the entire development. And then as far as the maintenance and monitoring, or the specifications of what they would anticipate having to do, that will be in conjunction between staff and our landscaping and engineering consultants, based on, previous experience or what our code requires.
But for a given piece of ground, 50 acres, the requirement to have on-site pond storage comes from Water Rec, IDNR, Army Corps, all the above?
It could, but it comes from the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, and then also is enforced by the village code. The village has their own code provisions, and occasionally the village is more restrictive than MWRD and vice versa. So we need to take a look at that individual piece of ground, but that's where the specifications come from.
Yeah, and in my experience over the years, the math has changed from MWRD, whether they get it from IDNR or Army Corps, if they're the entity we deal with. They increasingly have, I think, asked for more storage locally as opposed to water getting into streams and other stormwater pathways, correct?
That's correct. So just recently they increased the amount of volume in detention ponds by, they approved a new set of rainfall data that showed an increase in rainfall recently, which requires detention for all developments to be larger. And in the same respect, some of the code changes that recently took place were in regards to volume control. So adding additional areas of your site where you can retain water and reduce the amount of runoff. So I would agree with that.
So thank you. And so where I'm going with this one is someone moving into Orland in a new subdivision will potentially be responsible by this policy to maintain the pond that they're nearby. Got it. Those requirements are handed to us. We then enforce it through our code. But those homeowners are going to be basically paying the same tax rate as somebody who moved in 20 years ago, and their pond is owned by the village. So my essential argument is I don't really have a problem with the idea of having private maintenance for these various ponds. I think it's a policy worth considering. I'm concerned about the fairness that if you've been here for 20 years, you're set. The village owns it. Good luck at hunting. The new person comes in, pays the full tax load, and they might have an underlying SSA and a big bill in the future if something fails on the pond.
Right. Yeah, I guess that I would agree with that because you don't know necessarily when they purchased it, and we want to make sure that we are being fair to all of our residents, regardless of when they decided to move to Orland Park. Right. So that's something that we'll have to evaluate when we bring back the full code change and have a discussion on. But ultimately, I think what's important for the board to know is that this cost of the village retaining these assets is so significant that we don't want to jeopardize the functionality of the entire system. And if we have an opportunity to look at a different option, that it would be important to do so at this point.
Yeah, Mayor Pico, I agree with us. I agree with us taking a close look at that. That's not the question. It's the fairness, and I don't know if there's an easy solve. Anybody who's been living near a pond for 20 years might be shocked if we try to impose an SSA, because at its core, our costs have gone up for a raft of reasons, and we need to start doing better long-range financial planning to say this pond, per the mandates from the Water Reclamation District, are going to cost X over this amount of time. How do we appropriately collect the revenue to cover that? Is it the people there, or is it a broader-based tax just specifically to deal with these things? I don't have an answer right now, but I think these are the questions we're going to have to get into.
Okay, any other comments?
Mr. Mayor,
Trustee Calendro.
I do have a couple concerns. I'm open to the conversation, but definitely I would like to hear what the builders' input, the newer home builders' input. I know that they have some disagreement with some of our codes. I'd like to hear if they would favor this or not. I do think there's a fairness issue, but we're talking about detention ponds, correct?
Correct.
So in a detention pond, sometimes helps your neighbor, it flows like the creek, right?
I'm sorry.
So it's a detention pond. They all, most of them are connected, right?
It's part of an entire, stormwater
System.
management system.
Correct. So we may, hypothetically, one day we may make a special association expand their pond because of their neighbors to north, south, east, or whoever. That could happen.
I'm not quite sure I understand, but I think the one thing to keep in mind is although it is part of a system, each parcel or each piece of land that's developed has their own responsibility to that system. So I think the situation you're describing is potentially one development paying for another development's mistake, or so to speak, to simplify. I don't think that's something that we would look at, but we're going to evaluate all of these on an individual basis to make sure that we're being as fair as possible within the rules.
Right, because like for the creek example, that creek flows from other neighborhoods through it, and the water eroded the creek, so you can blame the system of doing that. I just feel like those are tough decisions that we have to make, but I feel like it's almost, you said, shifting a tax to the Special Assessment Association. I mean, municipalities have a couple things they have to do well. Police, public works, parks, in my opinion, if you don't have a park district. I just feel like, I'm open for the conversation, but I feel like we're shifting a tax burden here that the village should do, and that's why we're a village, and the fairness of the current owner versus new owner, or the example I just listed. So open the conversation, but I feel like this might be a little bit too much pushing to our homeowners or taxpayers.
Yeah, just to respond to that really quickly. So this isn't an automatic tax, I guess I want to stress. This is a dormant special service area. So the intent is that these changes to the code will prepare a homeowner association adequately to handle the future maintenance and costs. So if they do that and it functions properly, the intent is never to activate that special service area. That is the intent. So I understand what you're saying, but I just want to be clear about what we're actually talking about doing.
I understand your point. I still think it's wishful thinking that homeowner association is going to take care of this until we're hammering as a village, because they're expensive. So policy discussion, definitely. I'm just a couple of points that I would be concerned about.
In fairness, the HOA assessment would be a tax. It wouldn't be going to the village, but it's still a tax on their residents for being there. So they're still paying for it one way or another. Now, that's going to be much less if they maintain it properly. There's no question about that. But there is that discussion of fairness and new residents versus existing residents. But that's been, that discussion's been had many times over many decades in Orland Park regarding a lot of things, including parks. So, anybody disagree with them putting together all the facts and us having a discussion about it?
Nope.
Okay, then go ahead and do that.
Thank you.
That's it.
I'll entertain a motion or any non-scheduled visitors to speak at the committee of the whole? No? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Call the roll.
Trustee Fenn?
Aye.
Trustee Katsinas?
Aye.
Trustee Dodge?
Aye.
Trustee Calandrello?
Aye.
Trustee Healy?
Aye.
Trustee Malani?
Aye.
Mayor Pico?
Aye.